Okay.
All right. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. Hello, hello. Um, this is awkward. I'm introducing the whole thing, but I'm also the speaker. So if you don't know me, I'm Katie Simon. I'm the interim executive director of the Flannery O'Connor Institute for the Humanities at Georgia College. And we have one more event this semester to advertise our book club. Flannery O'Connor Book Club will be coming up. What is it? Thursday, the 12th of December. The in-person book club is in Eatonton on the square at 2 p.m. On Zoom at 7. Our text will be Monica Miller's collection of letters entitled Dear Regina, the letters of Flannery O'Connor and her mother, Regina, while Flannery was in Iowa. So come join us. We'll put the link up in a minute for that. And is there any other announcements? I think that's it for the Flannery O'Connor Institute for this semester. Next semester, we're gonna have a full slate of activities. Our centennial celebration, O'Connor's 100th birthday, is in March. On the 25th of March, we will have events all week, including a music festival, bluegrass. We're having a screening of Wildcat. We have lectures. We have birthday cake. We've got a lot going on. So stay tuned for that. If you want to be on our mailing list and you aren't receiving our newsletters, go ahead and put your email address in our chat and we'll make sure you get those. We have a monthly newsletter. So I'm going to turn it over to Bruce Gentry, our very own Bruce Gentry, who will introduce myself. And we're also so excited to have Evan Leavitt here, who will be giving a short talk after my talk. So Bruce.
Okay. I'm going to introduce Katie first, and then I'll introduce Evan right before his presentation. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Katie Simon is Associate Professor of English at Georgia College and Interim Executive Director of the Flannery O'Connor Institute for the Humanities. She's formally coordinated the program in Women's and Gender Studies and the MA program in English. She is an assistant editor of the Flannery O'Connor Review. She earned her PhD and her BA in English from UC Berkeley and her MA in English from Mills College. Her teaching and research interests examine the intersections between American literature, social justice, and the environment. Her work on Thoreau appears in ESQ. Her work on O'Connor appears in Women's Studies, and she's published pedagogy pieces in Bad Subjects, Political Education for Everyday Life. She is now co-editing a collection of essays, Forgotten Spaces, Environment and Social Justice in the U.S. South. Take it away, Katie. Oh, and let me say, before I mute myself, feel free to put questions in the chat. And how are we going to do Q&A? We're going to do Q&A for you, Katie, right after your talk, or are we going to save all the questions for the end? You're mute. Somehow you got muted, Katie.
Okay, sorry. Am I unmuted now?
You're unmuted now.
Yeah, I think we should save it to the end and make sure that
has save it all for the end. Okay. Take it away.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming. I'm delighted to be here and present a truncated version of a piece that is going to be published in an anthology entitled Reckoning with Race. And I'm delighted to have Evan Leavitt here. He was as I started working on this piece, I encountered his digital archive and it really influenced what I wanted to write. So here I go, and I changed the title. It's now The Blue Haunted South, Driving While Black, and Flannery O'Connor is a Good Man is Hard to Find. All right, so on April 22nd, 1959, Flannery O'Connor read her story, A Good Man is Hard to Find, to a packed audience at Vanderbilt University. Her reading that night was recorded, and by listening to it, one gets a sense of O'Connor as a consummate performer. She was someone who could work the room. And it is fascinating to listen to her ham it up and adapt her material for her audience. Given that this particular story takes its name from a blues tune, ubiquitous in O'Connor's time and widely recorded and interpreted, I propose we read her story as a variation on a theme, a performative reworking of the original source material. While scholars have identified various sources for the tale, the blues tune written by African-American singer, songwriter, performer Eddie Green, entitled A Good Man Is Hard to Find, has received scant attention. So here's the lyrics for the song as published by Eddie Green originally. And so a little bit of background on Eddie Green. Eddie Green was a vaudeville performer from Baltimore, and he sold his tune to Pace and Handy publishers in 1918. The song became a hit, and Green, capitalizing on the success, formed the Deluxe Players, a traveling musical comedy troupe that toured the South and performed the song in a variety of contexts. Eventually, Green made it to New York and Broadway, where the song appeared often. When Bessie Smith recorded it in 1927, she made it a hit yet again. Fats Waller recorded a jazzy version of it for RCA, 1939. Such famous race records were steadily crossing the color line, even as audiences themselves at the venues remained strictly segregated. And so here's the Bessie Smith record. Indeed, the original blues song crossed the color line repeatedly, and it crossed gender and class lines as well, as it was interpreted and improvised by different performers. The song traveled from major venues to small stages in backwoods shacks and roadside juke joints, moving on to reach every kind of audience imaginable. Ultimately, the song beamed electrically through radios and televisions around the world. Eddie Green became famous yet again when he moved to California, and he was cast in the original Amos and Andy show, a radio program that featured white actors playing black characters in the minstrel tradition. O'Connor herself had a radio on her desk when she lived in her Green Street house. Perhaps she listened to the show. And I mention this because I just saw the radio. It's so cool. The show transitioned from radio to television just as after Eddie Green died in 1950. So the death of Green, the wide publication of his obituary, and brewing public controversy about the demeaning nature of the show's blackface caricatures would mean that the song was being referenced in the news just as O'Connor was writing her story. And the NAACP had lodged a major protest against the television show. To take this song seriously as a source for O'Connor's story, as I suggest we do, requires remembering some forgotten context for O'Connor's work. In her teen years in the 1940s, and as a young woman who returned to Milledgeville in 1950 and lived there until 1964, O'Connor, in fact, resided in a cultural capital of sorts. Black music, forged from the spirituals of enslaved people in a cotton county, flourished in Milledgeville. African-American voices, recorded in the 1930s as prison blues by Alan Lomax in the Milledgeville Farm Prison, would inspire a generation of musicians whose sound helped create new music genres like soul, R&B, and rock and roll. In her small town and in the surrounding county, African-American performers worked and reworked new material in tiny clubs, bars, and juke joints that were primarily Black-owned and patronized by Black people. Archivist Evan Leavitt, in his groundbreaking digital exhibit entitled The Soul of Georgia, demonstrates how vibrant the area was musically and how central it was for incubating the ever-evolving continuum of African-American music. But the role of Milledgeville in this history of African-American music has largely been forgotten. At the time O'Connor was publishing her first stories in literary journals, there was a substantial Black middle class in Milledgeville, as there were several large employers, including the state mental institution and a state penitentiary. These are now closed. There were also, according to Leavitt, some 20 or so Black-owned music venues frequented mostly by workers from the Milledgeville Asylum and the prison. Indeed, Milledgeville was a stop on the, quote, Chitlin Circuit. And newly constructed highways made it a frequent gig for musicians traveling between the bigger cities of Atlanta, Macon, and Augusta. From Middle Georgia itself came musicians working on new sounds that would later go on to change music history. We're talking about big names like Little Richard and Otis Redding. Frequent performers in the area included Ray Charles, James Brown, Blind Willie McTell, Piano Red, Peg Leg Howell, and B.B. King. To be sure, O'Connor's Milledgeville was deeply segregated, and the lines between races were sharply demarcated. I'm not suggesting that O'Connor attended these clubs or even knew much about these performers, but in such a small town, the presence of a counter beat, a rich alternative frequency, could certainly be sensed and felt, if not heard. According to a map Leavitt has created, O'Connor's in-town family home on Green Street would have been surrounded by African-American venues for live music. For example, Lily Adam Bell's store, a flourishing West End neighborhood juke joint, was 9 blocks away from her house. The Blue Note Catbird store in Hardy's Hall, less than that. Many of the clubs that were out in the country were within 5 miles of either the Klein family home or Andalusia Farm. The sounds of blues, R&B, and soul were in the air. Melvin Davis, interviewed for Leavitt's exhibit, describes the atmosphere. He used to sit on a porch and hear Little Richard scream. And Little Richard was working out his material in Milledgeville for about 3 to 5 years. This is what he said. On the other side of our property, out in the woods, was a juke joint called Shady Rest, where Little Richard used to come and perform. I used to sit on the back porch and just listen to him scream and listen to the upsetters play. That was my first experience hearing live music, a whole band just playing this incredibly new music. It was way down through the woods, across this valley, but the music would come floating right across. It was an incredible atmosphere. Eventually, what Leavitt calls the Milledgeville sound would travel abroad and come back to Middle Georgia, recorded on vinyl by British performers like the Beatles, who opened in the UK for Macon, Georgia's own Little Richard, before they themselves hit it big. The British accents notwithstanding, the sound must have been uncannily familiar as O'Connor watched the Beatles perform on the Ed Sullivan Show. So here I'm going to skip a lot of stuff about A Good Man Is Hard to Find, particularly the minstrel kind of scenes in the beginning of the story, the road trip, the stock characters, in order to just move to the end quickly. So in the story's dramatic second half, the narrator engages with depravity, taking the reader into the consciousness of a character who feels no remorse about taking the lives of other human beings. There is a car accident, an encounter with an escaped convict, and the brutal murder of an entire family. And this is all narrated in such a pared down, matter-of-fact way that it heightens the sense of horror that the reader experiences. O'Connor stages a drawn-out dialogue between an apparent sociopath and the grandmother, who has already been painted as a stock figure for white Southern womanhood. Once the white traveling family encounters the misfit, the story leaves the broad comedy and racialized burlesque behind, and it begins to take on more overtly the melancholic tone of the blues, surrendering to the sense of sadness and loss that the tradition emits. Indeed, the misfit delivers lines that could come straight out of a blues song, and his dialogue is saturated with pathos, suffering, and pain. I won't read this whole thing, but I never was a bad boy that I remember of, the misfit says. And he goes on, it has a little monologue here. The misfit's lines, I never was a bad boy, I forget what I done, and I was buried alive, are part of what I want to call the misfit's blues sensibility. According to Florence Dorr, associating the blues with bad boys and the prisons was part of the early commodification and packaging of the blues. Indeed, Alan Lomax felt that the purity of the blues was enhanced in prison settings, where the performers he recorded had been isolated from popular culture. Their badness made for some very good versions of the songs, apparently. In O'Connor's story, however, the escaped convict talks back to the bad boy label he's been given. He doesn't remember something bad he might have done, if he did anything bad at all. He doesn't remember. The Misfit says that from early childhood, however, he was a bad fit within his own family, and he was told by his father that he was, quote, a different breed of dog. Moreover, the Misfit has had a welter of traumatic experiences. He has watched a woman being flogged. He has seen a man burnt alive. He's had a number of jobs, all of which could involve hardship and trauma, including being an undertaker, serving in the army, and working the railroads. He's spoken with the head doctor at the penitentiary about the possibility of his Oedipal complex. He's even been a good gospel singer, which would imply he knows how to sing sacred tunes, like many of the early African-American blues and R&B artists in the Milledgeville area, whose clubs were often right next door to small churches and served the same patrons. Perhaps most traumatic of all the very traumatic experiences the Misfit lists, is the experience of being caged for a crime he can't remember, if it even happened at all. His dialogue continues sounding like it came straight out of one of the recordings that Alan Lomax made in the Milledgeville Penitentiary. These songs were often about unfair punishments for African-American men. One example, "Oh, we don't get no justice here in Atlanta, for if you say the law ain't right, in jail, you'll spend the night." The Misfit croons a similar tune. "Turn to the left, it was a wall. Turn to the right, it was a wall. Look up, it was a ceiling. Look down, it was a floor. I forget what I done, lady. I sat there and I sat there and I ain't recalled it to this day." The story thus imagines the carceral space as a nightmare, purveying a gothic sense of being walled in or buried alive, whereas Lomax would see in the penitentiary a chance to capture the examples of folk music he saw in their purest form, unmarred by technology. O'Connor's story also represents the injustice of a penal system where, quote, stealing a car or, quote, killing a man might get someone the same punishment depending on who committed the crime or their race or class position. The Misfits' inability to remember whatever crimes might have been committed thus suggests a trumped-up legal system that privileges some and penalizes others for nothing, a stance that reverberates toward the context of African Americans in O'Connor's time and place. Amira Baraka, writing as Leroy Jones, coined the term blues people for a 1963 book detailing the rise of African American music from blues to jazz and its subsequent co-option by mainstream white culture into big band music. The Eddie Green blues song, "A Good Man Is Hard to Find," traveled a similar path. From a simple blues tune, it became a standard of the big bands. The year before O'Connor wrote her story, the song received royal treatment in mainstream white popular culture. In the 1952 Hollywood film Meet Danny Wilson, a film that itself describes the rise of a musician played by Frank Sinatra to the big time. Significantly, the film also dramatizes the ordeal of deciding if someone is good or not. At the center of the film is the question, is Danny Wilson, aka Frank Sinatra, a good man, or is he, like the mafia club owner extracting wealth from him through threats of violence, a bad man? Indeed, once I saw the film, it became hard not to read "A Good Man Is Hard to Find" through the lens of Meet Danny Wilson. And this film isn't widely available because Sinatra hated it because it was somewhat biographical. But once we read through the lens of Meet Danny Wilson, this story, where we can further understand just how these theatrical and musical traditions affected O'Connor's work. The film also offers clues about the complex way that race and ethics get entwined through her tale, through her citation of Eddie Green's song. So here's another image from the film. In the film, the duet that these two characters end up doing, they do a duet version of A Good Man Is Hard to Find. So there's two versions of this song in the film. One is a kind of simple blues number with Shelley Winters at the piano, and the other is a big band duet. So in the film, the duet, like the long scene between the misfit and the grandmother, is staged as a duel, a contest of wills. And at stake is whether a good man or a good gal is hard to find. The repartee between Sinatra and Winters takes on a sinister tone at times, with the female character ultimately dominating the male. Shelley Winters' version of the song, like many of the recorded versions by female singers over the years, improvises and alters the original song, clapping back at the misogynistic moral of the tale. Because the song basically says, treat your man right, because you won't find a better one. Indeed, in presenting a duet that features two competing versions of a song, alternating with one another, the film creates a battle between the sexes. Winters' lyrics play counterpoint to the main idea of the tune, undercutting the erstwhile male domination of the regressive lyrics sung by Sinatra. With a brassy swagger, Winters questions Green's simplistic song as Sinatra sings it, while Sinatra delivers lines like, keep a smile on your face and keep your big mouth shut. Winters cuts in with, Buster, you gotta be kidding. Calling Danny Wilson, aka Sinatra, the one with the feeble mind, Winters tells him, I'm running the show, Jack, you better stay in line. By the end of the number, she is making clawing gestures with her hand near his face and threatening him that if he doesn't act right, she will, quote, slide over there and turn off all your lights. The setting for this, duet is a formal party. The singers are accompanied by a big jazzy band. At the end of the number, Winters lets out an a cappella yelp, coyly shouting, oh man. She does this as a suggestive phrase, the way that a performer like Little Richard would shout out sounds and phrases to suggest unbridled sexuality. As in Meet Danny Wilson, O'Connor offers a version of the blues tune as a duet, sung by the grandmother and the misfit. She raises the stakes of the performance, as the film does, by creating a variation that feels elaborate, complex, almost symphonic. She goes for Hollywood big band rather than simple solo blues ditty. In O'Connor's story, there's an intense moment of almost intimacy. When the grandmother reaches for the misfit's shoulder, he recoils as if a snake bit him and shoots her 3 times in the chest. This act of maternal love offered by the grandmother proves too much for the misfit. Intimacy is not available for him. His violence recalls the sinister element of violence suffused into the mafia backstory of the film Meet Danny Wilson. Disappointed in love, Danny Wilson becomes for a time as mean and menacing as the mafia bosses he's avoiding, humiliating his best friend on stage in a club and trying to fight him. The film resolves the issue by making Danny good when he stands up for himself, transforming him from a bullied short guy into a brave man willing to throw his own punches. This 1952 film theorizes a type of good violence as bravery, while the mafia violence is marked as bad. In O'Connor's story, there is no such redemption for the misfit, and his heroism is not available. His violence is not redeemed as appropriate, and his nonchalance about it marks a further level of horror. He treats murder as if it were an everyday matter, like cleaning one's glasses or borrowing a shirt. Like a figure in a cartoon or a classic Hollywood Western, the misfit maintains his cool, not hesitating once he murders the grandmother, simply asking to get the bodies out of the way so he can move on down the road. Having teased out some of the ways that O'Connor appropriates and adapts the Eddie Green song to her story, I'd like to return again to the social, cultural, and historical context for A Good Man is Hard to Find. While certainly a white family could experience terror breaking down on a backwoods road, for Black travelers in Middle Georgia, the fear would have been heightened. It would also have been mundane. Fear of traveling while Black, especially during the 1950s, would have been a routine experience, a kind of everyday horror. The terror in this case is not being alone in the woods, but rather encountering armed white men who could kill with impunity. And there's many examples of this in Milledgeville. If you're interested, we can talk about it in the Q&A. So for traveling Black musicians like Eddie Green when he toured with his group, or those like James Brown, Little Richard, and Ray Charles, who made the drive from Milledgeville to Augusta, or Macon to Milledgeville, the country roads connecting the bigger towns and cities would have been scary indeed to drive. In O'Connor's time, a manual called the Green Book offered advice about safer routes to travel, and it listed towns that had at least one motel where Black people could stay. While Macon and Augusta are listed, O'Connor's Milledgeville never appears in the Green Book as a safe place to travel, and there are no entries of places that Black people might stay. And this is from like 52 to 64. Given the rich, so you can see the towns that are listed as having a place you might go to eat or stay. Given the rich, forgotten context for this story, I'd like to suggest that perhaps we are meant to read the traveling family as Black and to see the predicament they face in the woods as the everyday threat of violence that Black travelers might have sensed affectively or actually experienced, both in the town of Milledgeville and in the surrounding woods, dirt roads, and highways leading out and leading in. As I have shown in O'Connor's story, the woods and meadows are haunted by blues people, and variations of Eddie Green's song circulate from the juke joint to the big stage to the big screen. For a white family from Atlanta, the horror in the woods would be unexpected. But for the African-American blues travelers who would have performed the song in Middle Georgia during O'Connor's time, the confrontation with badness would have been the cost of doing business. If O'Connor's stated intentions don't support a reading such as mine, I don't think that should blind us from responsibly researching the many contexts for her work that she may have been unaware of herself or just have taken for granted. Like a purloined letter, the title of a blues tune announces itself in O'Connor's work, hidden in plain sight. The importance of the song to this story and the context of African-American music it references has gone missing for decades. Perhaps it is time to start paying attention. Thank you. And let me stop sharing. And I'm going to turn it back to Bruce, who's going to introduce Evan Leavitt.
And I will unmute myself. Okay, Evan Leavitt is an archivist, librarian currently working as the manager of facilities operations and planning at Ina Dillard Russell Library at Georgia College. He has a diverse background of experience in archaeology, public history, oral history, participatory community storytelling, and exhibit curation. He serves as the director of the Salvation Project, Preserving Middle Georgia Black Gospel Music, a collaboration with the Baylor University Black Gospel Archive to create a localized collection of Black gospel songs in situ of the place and people who created the music. He is also an advisory board member for the Georgia Public Library Services DIGEX, that's D-I-G-E-X program, which empowers libraries to use their unique digitized materials to tell the stories of their libraries and communities through digital exhibits. And he is co-editor of a scholarly edition of John Brown's autobiography, Slave Life in Georgia, which is forthcoming from UGA Press. Evan, there you are. Take it away.
Thank you, Bruce. All right, let me see if I can share my screen. Let's see. Oh, let's see. It's being difficult for me. So this is what happens when you haven't shared your screen on your computer before. Oh, man.
See, Evan, so if you just press the green button, it should show you, and then there's a blue
Yeah,
around the part you want.
my Mac is wanting me to share my permissions with Zoom.
Oh,
And
because you're trying to show a digital collection.
yeah, so here, let me, please bear with me. I apologize.
It's totally fine. I thought I had it up here, so let me see if I could show it.
Here, I'm going to email my PowerPoint to you real fast.
Okay.
And then I'll let you share it and then I'll talk.
Okay.
Well, that is unfortunate.
Are you using a PowerPoint or are you using your digital image? Are you using the digital archive itself? Because I have that up on the screen.
Here, 1 second.
Okay.
I think I just got my admin access here. So let me do this real quick. No, it's not letting me. Okay, so I will forward this to you real fast. It is on the way. Well, that's coming. I'm going to try one more time.
Yeah, it's telling me I don't have access.
Okay, 1 second.
So one thing we can do is just screen share the actual exhibit if you want and talk through that.
I've got it. We're in. I'm going to have to quit Zoom and come back in real fast.
Okay.
All right, be right back.
Play some more Bessie.
Okay, I am back. Let's see if this works. Okay, I think we are good now. All right, I apologize for that, everybody. I am thankful for our IT being on top of things and letting me in. Okay, so can y'all just see my slides and not my presenter view? Okay, all right. Well, first off, hello, everybody. I'm Evan Leavitt, and I'm so appreciative to have the opportunity to speak with y'all tonight about what I'm calling the sonic landscape of Middle Georgia, and to talk to you a little bit about the exhibit I curated, the Soul of Georgia. And off the bat, I'll let you know I am not an O'Connor scholar. I'm a fan, but I'm definitely not a scholar. So this is kind of outside my wheelhouse. But I wanted to find a way to talk about the exhibit in a way that kind of relates back to O'Connor and, to find some correlations on how, she might have experienced this history that we talk about in the exhibit. So I will get started here. And so, I've long believed that all roads lead back to Milledgeville in some way, or at least to the Middle Georgia region, which seems to just kind of hold this inexplicable energy that creativity, just comes out of and also pulls you into it. And when it comes to Black music, this holds true as well. For example, here's a little known fact. Berry Gordy Jr., the founder of Motown Records, his mother was born in Milledgeville, and his father was born in Sandersville, just right south of here. And they lived in Middle Georgia until they migrated to Detroit in 1923, shortly before Berry Jr. was born. So you see, you cannot talk about Black music without talking about Georgia's influence in shaping this beautiful sonic tapestry that has really just threaded itself into our everyday existences. And when we contemplate the evolution of African American music, what we really see is an intertwining of African American, and United States histories, which we can view as really a communication between the present and the past, and a creative response to the shifting realities of the Black experience, of the American experience. For example, even though the true origin of the blues is unknown, it isn't mystical. It's emotional. It's an evolution. And the codification of Black music into genres, such as spirituals, gospel, jazz, blues, R&B, soul, rock and roll, hip hop, and rap, is really representative of a continuum of history. So back to Milledgeville and Middle Georgia, and how some of the ways this region is connected to this musical history. Katie asked me to talk about the Soul of Georgia exhibit that I curated, which touches on these historical progressions of musical forms and discusses the contributions made by Milledgeville, the surrounding area, and the state to this history, while at the same time contextualizing these evolutions within the societal forces that shape the sounds of the times, and may on some levels help frame, Flannery's sonic landscape, because we must acknowledge that, music is a reflection, an interpretation, and an expression of our cultural, political, social, geographic, and economic diversity. Now, I feel like a current of sound eddied in this area, and whether it was the early country blues of Peg Leg Howell, or a group of local teenage kids, Gloria Walker and the Chevelles, who sang their soul music all the way to the stage of the Apollo Theater, or the seminal artists like Little Richard and Ray Charles, Otis Redding, and James Brown, who introduced to the world new exciting sounds. The residents of Milledgeville and the surrounding area really had the opportunity to see the stars at night and witness history being made. So I'll touch on a few of the ways this area birthed and incubated music, and then in proper Southern Gothic tradition, show how this was a place sometimes where music came to die. So spirituals evolved into gospels and the blues, which are the bedrock of modern music. And even though they're viewed as opposites, gospel as the sacred music of Sunday morning and blues being the Saturday night music of sin and vice, each begat the other, but it's kind of like the chicken and the egg. It's really hard to know which came first. But what is clear is that both genres deal in the grotesque and grace and redemption. And Black gospel music is intrinsically linked to Georgia. It was birthed when Thomas Dorsey, a native of Villa Rica, Georgia, first married the rhythms of jazz and blues with the sacred text of the gospel. However, Dorsey got his start in 1923 when he formed the Wildcat Jazz Band, which became Ma Rainey's very own backing band. So even before he became known as the father of gospel music, he was playing A Good Man Is Hard to Find with Ma Rainey.
Wow.
And Milledgeville also played a role in the preserving of vernacular blues music. Blues music began to really grow in popularity in the early 20th century as access to music increased with the invention of the phonograph record and through the reach of the Sears catalog. And this brought about really a frenzied search for Black blues musicians that record companies could exploit. Artists were rarely compensated well for their recorded performances, and royalties were often not even brought into the equation at all. But as the Great Depression took hold of the nation, the record industry realized that they needed to cut cost, and Black music, what the industry at the time referred to as race music, was the first to go. And this meant that for most of the 1930s, the recording of Black musicians was limited, and documentation of blues music, if and when documented at all, was left up to folklorists. And Lomax was one of those folklorists. Lomax feared that, as Katie said, these emerging technologies, such as the radio, the gramophone, phonograph, would end that time-honored tradition of transmitting music and lore from person to person, and that professionally produced music would dilute and eliminate potentially the purity of that traditional regional music. So beginning in 1933, Lomax began touring the southeastern United States, visiting prison farms because he believed, they contained that untouched musical tradition, that being isolated, that the inmates would have that store of knowledge. And in 1934, Lomax and his driver, Leadbelly Ledbetter, arrived at the Georgia State Prison Farm on the outskirts of Milledgeville to record these work songs and ballads and blues from the prisoners for the Library of Congress. And these recordings are housed now in the American Folklight Center at the Library of Congress. And I really highly recommend everyone going in and just listening to these just amazing field recordings that were done here. Now, the Middle Georgia region also incubated music. So coursing through the whole South was a network of loosely connected venues, clubs, dance halls, juke joints, known as the Chitlin Circuit. And Milledgeville, located between Atlanta and Macon and Augusta, was a regular stop. And the musicians that played here were vast. James Brown, Bobby Bland, B.B. King, Little Richard, and some that were less known, such as like Piano Red, played local venues such as the Ebony Lounge and Shady Rest and Dewdrop Inn. And these establishments are really representative of the creative agency of African Americans in response to segregation. And they provided Black entertainers with a commercial outlet through the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. For the exhibit, I documented as many of these juke joints of Milledgeville and Baldwin County as I could. And this mappable geography kind of embodies a figurative landscape of African-American identity building and provides tangible access points into kind of the emotional landscape of the Black cultural experience for Milledgeville. And the heart of the exhibit is really rooted in participatory community storytelling. Therefore, the bulk of the information for this map was attained through community sources. And this allowed those who are portrayed and who experienced the area's musical landscape, allowed them to inform me in how to curate their story. And these community sources were really the best avenue to learn about the establishments, but more importantly, to understand their importance within the community. So I guess, and lastly, Milledgeville, in true Southern Gothic style, has been a place where music has sometimes come to die. And so in 1959, William McTeer was admitted to the Milledgeville State Hospital, now known as Central State Hospital, and he was a diabetic. He had recently suffered his second stroke, and McTeer, who was blind and unable to care for himself anymore, needed assistance that his family just couldn't provide anymore. And so his family took him to the hospital in Thompson, Georgia, where he lived, and they were directed to obtain a petition for commission of lunacy from the county sheriff. This petition was necessary for Georgia residents to gain free admittance to the Milledgeville State Hospital. And this was a necessity for McTeer because he was a Black man, and no other regional hospital was available to him for free. So, arriving at the asylum in August 1959, McTeer was installed in the Interim building, which housed the Black male patients at Central State and still stands today. And after a week, mostly spent unaware of his surroundings, McTeer passed away on August 19th, 1959, and he died of a cerebral hemorrhage. But what's not known is if the people around him and the people that treated him knew him by any of his other monikers. Georgia Bill, Hotshot Willie, Barrel House Sammy, Pig and Whistle Red, Blind Doggy, Red Hot Willie Glaze, Red Hot Willie are most recognizable today, Blind Willie McTell. And, you know, while not a well-known artist at the time, even though he had recorded multiple recordings since the 1920s, and unlike other blues artists of his generation, well into the 1940s and 50s, Willie did influence many generations of blues musicians. However, he didn't gain the notoriety he holds today until he was immortalized by a later white artist. His song Statesboro Blues was made a Southern rock anthem by the Allman Brothers, and Willie himself was enshrined by Bob Dylan's song Blind Willie McTell. Now, though McTell and O'Connor never directly intersected, you know, their works do reflect shared thematic parallels that are rooted in the American South and offer enduring insights into its beauty and struggles and contradictions. And themes of alienation and belonging also resonate in their work. McTell's blindness and experience in a segregated society lend his music undercurrents of longing, while O'Connor's characters frequently exist on society's fringes, seeking meaning and connection. And McTell's anonymous death and society's delayed epiphany of his genius is, I feel like, a tragedy worth of an O'Connor story. So what was Flannery's experience with all of this? I will leave that to the O'Connor scholars. But it is likely that this music did, you know, reverberated around her in one way or another, living in this community, and whether it was experienced through the Hill family and Andalusia, or if it just drifted mystically across the landscape, or was piped directly into her room over the airways while listening to either Macon's WBML or WIBB or Atlanta's WERD. No matter what, though, I feel like Flannery would have enjoyed it. So that's what I have. I thank y'all for letting me speak with y'all tonight. Now, if you want to see all of the Solar Georgia exhibit, you can visit our galleries page, which I have the address here. And you'll be able to find the Soul of Georgia exhibit and all of our other digital exhibits. The Soul of Georgia exhibit is also a physical exhibit. So kind of the physical and the digital have a different experience to them as you look at them and process and taking the information. So if you do have time to come to us here at some point and see the physical exhibit, that'd be great. And we would love to have you. And that is all. Thank you.
Okay, folks, so we have some time for questions. You can, let's see if we can get the
Stop
Yeah, I'm
screen
trying to-
sharing.
gallery of everybody's little
Hmm.
squares on the screen up here. You can put a question into the chat function, or you can wave your hand, and if we see you, we'll call on you. Let's see if we see everybody here. Hey, there's Sue Watley. Unmute.
Hi, I really enjoyed the presentations tonight. And I wanted to ask if either one of you had come across a letter in which O'Connor referred to her mother and her musical taste. And I'm not quoting it correctly. Bruce, you may know the letter, where she says her mother preferred the kind of music that went back and forth, I think, and she liked the kind that went up and down.
Gee.
Do you remember that
I
letter?
remember that one. Sorry. That's good.
I just wondered if it might have a bearing on, both of your presentations. I've always wondered about that, and I've written a note to myself to explore that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't even know what it means.
The letter that pops into my head as I listen to all this is the one about Flannery visiting New Orleans, and she goes by a nightclub and just gets just enough of a notion of what's going on in there that she says, I could live here. I should come back. I want more of this. You know, it's in your own backyard, darling. You just need to pay a little more attention. You know, if Flannery wouldn't listen to this music, probably a whole lot of the people in town who became her characters were listening to all this music. So there has to be some hard to document influence going on. You know, this is I think this is great stuff. Now we'll have to go back through all the letters and look for indirect references to music. I think that's true. I'm going to start tomorrow looking for more music references. You know, because she snowed us by telling us that she didn't care anything about music and she didn't know anything about music, blah, blah, blah. She's just pretending.
Yeah, she makes little statements, little quips, and then, I have a tin ear. So then everyone says, oh, she wasn't influenced by music, as though she didn't watch film or watch TV. It's all around her, even if Blind Willie McTell was a street performer. Were there street performers in Milledgeville? That's a question I have. It's a little town. If you go to church, you might see a street performer around the block at the post office. I don't know. You know what I mean? Or someone busking. So I don't know that just because she didn't play music, that's kind of what the references are in the letters that I see, that she wasn't a sophisticated musician. She didn't have the knack. Doesn't mean that music wasn't around her and didn't influence or shape her aesthetics.
Okay, my question is, Katie, you said it was hard to find Meet Danny Wilson, that movie, but obviously you did find it. How?
Hal Carpenter and the GCSU library found it on Internet Archives for me. Now, this film is like a major Hollywood film. When you watch it, it looks like, what? We should all be watching this. It should be on reruns all the time. But apparently Sinatra bought most of the copies and trashed it because it he didn't like the portrait of him that was kind of too close to home. But there are on the Internet Archive, you can watch it at streams, and Kel Carpenter kindly
Okay.
hooked me up with
Okay,
that when I
well.
was desperate. I mean, I was searching everywhere for it. So, and it's, you know, it's weird because all the songs, it's a musical. All the songs are super big hits and they're very familiar and we all know them kind of, you know what I mean? But the film isn't just circulating. And it's because of the kind of, you know, the musician who, you know, his roots with the mafia was a little too much, I think, for, I don't know. It's a story that needs to be told, I think, you know. But it opened in 1952. And I have, you know, some student researchers going through the microfiche, trying to see, did it play in Milledgeville, you know, and all the years are digitized except those years you have to kind of go to the library and scroll through. So maybe we can, do we have to prove it? I mean, it came out in 52. She wrote her story. I mean, it's kind of, you know, so I don't know, even if she never saw the film, she might have seen trailers for it, you know, it was a kind of big deal. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
but it gets
Okay,
to a
so-
question about, do we have to prove she saw a film to say there's a kind of connection, you know? I don't think so. I don't think I have that burden of proof.
Yeah. Okay, we got questions here, and the first one from Christine. A question for Katie: is there any evidence of violence against Black people in and around Milledgeville? Recorded history of lynchings? You betcha. What's your answer?
Yeah. So in the longer piece that I'm publishing, I talk about sundown towns. A sundown town is a town where if you're Black, you're told you need to leave by sundown, you know? So there's one 35 miles away, Forsyth. The Stembridge murders is a kind of big case where Stembridge was a kind of local business owner, owned a pawn shop, you know, rentals, and he went to collect some rent, ended up shooting a Black woman, killing her. And that was in the press, right? When in 1949 is when that started. The trial, that kind of thing. It was in the national press. It was picked up. I think Stembridge was going to trial, and he ended up shooting his lawyer and another guy in cold blood, and he didn't serve any time in jail. So that was a really infamous case that was happening right when O'Connor was writing that story. So those are just a couple of examples. I think there are oral histories, and maybe Evan can tell me about that, or Chandra, where locals have talked about lynchings they witnessed as children. So I don't think it's, you know, a stretch to say there was a lot of violence against Black people in Milledgeville.
Bob Wilson used to say that he knew where the tree was in Milledgeville that was used for lynchings, and it's now a parking lot. I forget where, somewhere north of downtown. I visualize it
Down
as
by the rec
somewhere on North Columbia
Yeah,
Street.
I've heard of that too.
That's where lynchings occurred. It just seems right that lynchings had happened somewhere along North Columbia Street.
Yeah.
Does anybody else know more about that? Evan, Chandra?
There's some documentation in Mab Segrist's book, which is the Administrations of Lunacy, about Central State Hospital of Lynch. She has a whole chapter where many of the people who were in prison or in the mental institution were coming from towns with high numbers of lynchings. And so she's sort of tracing like a traumatized person who now is needing, you know, to be institutionalized. There also was an infamous breakout, and this isn't a Black person, but a Jewish person was lynched. And I forget, you know that one, Evan? I think it's in your exhibit, right?
Leo Frank, yes.
Leo Frank, yeah. And your exhibit talks quite a bit about it, doesn't it? Or after?
Yes, we do. Yeah,
Mhm.
we in the video I made about Lomax coming to the prison farm, I brought all that history into that narrative as well, because it was pretty important contextual information for that story.
Yeah.
And that's the prison that was just torn down, right?
Exactly, in the dark of night.
In the dark.
Yeah. So that's the one where, it's kind of a big deal that Lomax is kind of a big deal, would come to Milledgeville and record those. But then, yeah, Evan's exhibit, they went in person one, does a great job. There's films you can watch that give this whole history. Really excellent exhibit. I hope you guys can check it out. That's why I wanted to share the air with him. I just really think it's a great resource that Evan's provided. Let's see, are there any other questions?
I don't have a question. I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed this pairing. And, it just brings to light like Katie, you're talking about what Flannery's, we can assume she was influenced. I think it's a safe assumption by the culture of Milledgeville, the music, the film. And yeah, I just really liked y'all doing these together. And I've seen Evan spoke to my class one time about the using the story map software. But anyway, I really liked this pairing and I learned a lot, and thank y'all. I can't even stand to think about the prison farm being torn down. But anyway, thank y'all very much.
Thank you. Yeah, and I should say we were talking about earlier on Saturday at 10, we just found out that there's a talk, and it's at a local church. I can't remember that. Do you know, Jess?
It's at the Chapel of All Faiths.
Chapel of All Faiths at 10 a.m. And Mab Segrist, who wrote the book on Central State, is going to give a keynote. So if you're interested in that history, she's the expert, in my view, of the whole, because she did a whole history of African American context for Central State Hospital, right? Chapel of All Faiths.
And that's on the Central State campus.
That's the church that's right there on the Pecan Grove, right? Right,
Mhm.
the center, right in front of the main building. Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
Anyone else have comments or questions?
So, hi. I don't know if you can hear me. Christine Atkins. I was an Flannery O'Connor scholar, whatever, NEH scholar. So my question is, what's your sense of the black-white relations at this point in Millie? Because I got the feeling that there's a sort of detente where nobody wants to really talk about what happened. And I think that, like, there are people, for example, who worked, like the descendants of the Hill family who worked for O'Connor, and they don't want to talk. I mean, my sense is it's such a small place that because it's such a small town, people don't want to, like, shake things up. But learning, I mean, this, by the way, this has been fabulous. I mean, I'm learning so much. And I had a feeling there had been lynchings. I had a feeling there had been really bad things that happened to Black people. But I guess my question is, what about the smallness or the closeness of the community has sort of made it hard for people to talk about what really happened? Because I'm really interested in finding out more about the oral history of Black people in Millie.
You want to take that, Evan?
Um, and that's a hard question to answer. Um, and I feel like any small southern town, kind of experiences um, that phenomenon of our history. And, you know, I would say, just from my point of view of building and curating this exhibit, it was not my story to tell. I mean, I love music and that's my passion, but it's not my history. And so the only way these stories can be told is by talking to the people who made this history. And, also being in the academy, there's the whole town and gown, and then there's the whole everything else that you have to deal with and that exist. It's just reality. And it takes time, it takes trust, and you have to work to gain trust. And I know, the core of our exhibit, what initiated the exhibit was me learning about Gloria Walker and the Chevelles, and I had never heard of them. Even though I love soul music and I collect soul music, and once I heard about it, I was just like, what are y'all talking about? Like, who is this amazing group of kids that, just from Milledgeville, Georgia, had a hit that went to #7 on the R&B chart and 60 on the Hot 100, in 1968. And,
Hmm.
Through the grapevine, and this is the way it works, just talking to one person, eventually the news traveled to the niece of Gloria Walker, really her only surviving relative, and she raised her niece, called me out of the blue. Or actually, she had her godmother call me out of the blue to test me, just to see what I was doing and why I was interested. And thankfully, I passed mustard and was able to have a meeting, and then from there it just blossomed. It's just a matter of sitting down and talking with people. And I know it got to the point, like, for over 6 months, we met once a week and just sat and talked for 3 to 4 hours at a time. And every week they would bring somebody new to the table, and it was always a full table. And so it's whenever you are trying to do work of this nature, that's what it takes. It just takes, finding an ally that you can then hopefully build. But it's like, it has to be honest, it has to be genuine. And like the friends I made, I mean, we're like family, and we talk every week, and we do things together. And so it's been something that's been so rewarding of an experience to see the possibilities of what, for me professionally, what work like this can do and accomplish, but just personally opens your eyes to how you can, approach people and relate to people, and try just on your own level to, fight these currents of discourse that we have running through everything.
Isn't there an oral history project centered on Black Milledgeville going on through the library?
We have a couple of programs. One, and this relates to the what Mabs is going to be talking about this weekend. We had an IMLS grant, and we partnered with the Middle Georgia Regional Library, and that project is to collect oral histories of employees of Central State Hospital. So, and we're trying to get a very diverse, group of people, because everybody in the community worked there at the state, as they called it. And, that So that's a great project. We've had, and Chandra led this initiative of an NEH grant, the Common Heritage Grant, where we worked with African American community, and we went to the community and digitized their materials. And if they were willing, they would share the digital copy with us that could be put on the Digital Library of Georgia. But it's a way for us to do this active archiving and participatory archiving that allows us to hopefully build, African American narratives for our community, but not in custodial ways. Like, we don't want your stuff. We just want to help you preserve your history and amplify it.
Mhm.
Yeah, and we might add that the Flannery O'Connor Institute is currently hosting. We wrote a grant for an NEH grant for oral histories to collect having to do with O'Connor, and so we have a group of student workers. Stephanie Opperman is the principal investigator on this, a historian here at Georgia College, and they've widened out. At first, it was people who knew O'Connor. People who family maybe knew or had some, so we're collecting because those people are, aging out. But then we started anyone who has any information about the time period when O'Connor was here. And so they've had the student, we had a presentation at the conference in September, the O'Connor conference, and the students are reporting that, yeah, a lot of these people want to tell their stories. A lot of people have been like, no, what are you doing with this? You're going to put it online? Great. I want this out there. Oh, it's time is now to tell these stories. So they are collecting lots and lots of stuff. And I think it's going to be impressive. Some of that's going to come out in the Flannery O'Connor review. We'll do a sampling of that. Some of it will be up on Knowledge Box through the library, but it'll be an archive for people, and Christina, I appreciate your questions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I really
Mhm.
think that we have to get more Black scholars involved. I know like Patricia Ann West has been really trying. And I'm a white person. I actually wrote an oral history of a Black owned jazz club here in New York. And even, but I'm white. So so this is really of interest to me because it's really tricky. Like, you want to preserve the history, but you have to really embed yourself. I mean, there's a part of me that wants to come back to Millie with maybe my friend Colin Cutler, like, who is not white. Like, because I want to get these histories. I want to really get the truth. And I mean, Bruce knows, I've talked about it. It's such a gap in O'Connor studies. Like, we know all about the white people and we know what she said about, Shot and the Hills. But when I last was in Milledgeville in September, it was like, oh, I met a woman who was like, oh, yeah, I know the great niece of Louise Hill, but she doesn't want to talk about it because they were treated really badly by the O'Connors. And it's like, what the hell? Like, maybe I need to go down there with a person of color because obviously I'm white, but I want more. We need more scholarship, and we need more everything to get the fuller picture. And I think, but I also get it. Like, this is my point. It's like a small town, and people have to live together. They have to sort of coexist. And I'll shut up.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different angles. So there's the historians, there's the literary scholars, there's the archivists, there's a lot of different ways to approach collecting the history. I mean, I live here, so I feel like I live in this archive, and if you are here and in the community, you just see things and, and So I've got that experience, and I don't know, I think it's all useful. I don't think that, any one person's, I don't know. This is one thing though that Milledgeville seems to be really central. Like Evan is showing how central Milledgeville was to so many histories, and yet it's also forgotten. And that's the same thing with the Central State Hospital. It was the largest mental institution in the country, right? In 1934, it was founded. In O'Connor's lifetime, it was the largest mental institution in the country, 12,000 patients. There's 25,000 unmarked graves out there. There's this whole history. And when you go and you see people, at academic conferences that are talking about 19th century mental institution, it's not even on their radar. They don't even know about it. It's this forgotten history, right? And that's sort of what motivates me with this project is like, some stories just get told over and over. The story that O'Connor had a tin ear, she didn't like music, but then we don't hear I didn't know that Little Richard was from Macon and was working out his sound in Milledgeville, screaming in the meadows until I saw Evans. Why wouldn't I know that? The Beatles are influenced by him, and he worked out his sound here. It's really cool. So
Okay, we got a question from Justice Yu. You want to unmute?
Hi, yeah. So my name is Justice. First, I just wanted to thank you guys for your extremely well-researched presentations. I'm not an O'Connor scholar. I'm just a student, and so I love getting to hear, the recent scholarship and whatever. But anyways, my question is that given, this sort of racial reckoning going on, both with O'Connor's letters and in America, more broadly speaking, do you see your research sort of addressing O'Connor's personal racism? Because I'm guessing you do. How? Because I know there have been some recent attempts to address O'Connor's racism by separating the art and the artist, and some attempts to imagine O'Connor as someone of two minds, um, and other attempts along those lines as well. But how does O'Connor's personal racism, as expressed in her private letters, I guess, play into your work here? Do you see it? Do you see it in that way?
I guess I'll take that since I'm writing about O'Connor. I don't see her as too. I mean, I see O'Connor as a complex person, like many, like everyone. I don't say she's racist. She's from a racist era and she has lots of racist thoughts. I think she also is pushing against racism in a lot of her work. I feel like she critiques white supremacy quite a bit. And, she didn't want to make topical statements. She sort of has all these statements about the topical isn't, art. But I teach O'Connor and I find that she's really incredible to start to have she's an incredible place to have conversations. And I see very few literary artists that are putting this much together. If you read The Displaced Person, okay, so she's basically created a farm, a farm. She lived on a farm, the setting's a farm, and the farm is basically staged as a kind of, American death camp, where a Polish family fleeing the Holocaust comes to work and finds a hellscape. That's what Huntley Hughes calls it, so she's not flinching. She's not sentimental about where she's from. I don't think she apologizes for it. But she also makes statements, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. And some people take that as that she's benefiting from racism. So she's not gonna, I take it another way. When she moved back, she was profoundly disabled. That's why she moved back. She needed to be taken care of. She's not gonna antagonize the people who are taking care of her. She's gonna fit in, and people can have their own opinions about her doing that. I see her as pretty dependent So, you know, I don't know, I don't know if that, what her, I mean, and she's from a very racist culture. She makes a lot of racist statements, but I noticed that in her work, she's the racist characters are burlesqued and made fun of and critiqued quite a bit and punished. So I don't know what you do with all that. I don't know if that answered your question, but I see the music. I think that it was such a segregated culture that it's almost like you want to say there's no influence. And that's kind of what I'm pushing back at, because I live here. If I, you know, Evan has shown me where the sheriff's office used to be a club, an African-American club. Like literally, it's like a couple blocks from the Klein house. So how could she not have heard Little Richard if he was playing there? He's screaming. You know what I mean? So I just kind of don't buy, even though if the worlds were separate, that there wasn't any kind of cross-pollination or influence or exchanging of ideas. And so I'm less interested in, is O'Connor a racist, than what does O'Connor's work help us? How does it help us think about racism? How does it help us talk about racism? That's how I would answer that. But I'm interested in what other people have to say, you know?
Thank you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think there's no doubt that O'Connor's work is anti-racist. Um, but I also feel that her letters are, there's a lot going on there.
Oh yeah, yeah. Quite complex. But you know, I don't feel the need. I feel like sometimes, I mean, it's like a lot of writers. Hemingway was completely sexist. Am I not going to admire his stories? I mean, it's part of the story. That's part of how we talk about Hemingway, but it doesn't, I don't think it's the whole story, is their personal beliefs even. That's my my feeling about it. I don't necessarily want to go have dinner with everybody whose work I admire. You know what I mean? I don't require them to be my best friend, me to be able to work with what they're putting out there as an artist. I mean, some of these people are horrible people. I don't have anything to do with them, but I'll admire their work and teach it and think about it. It's useful to me, you know. Yeah, Truman Capote. I don't know. There's a lot that James Dickey. I don't know. Well, okay, so we're getting kind of, this is one of the longer ones. That's a great question though. It's not, I don't have a real answer. There's so many things. I mean, I want to, this piece that's coming out is in a anthology called Reckoning with Race, and it's on O'Connor. And so I'm really excited to see what the other people are doing, because I just ended up getting involved in music, and I just feel like I left that question behind, because I'm more interested in, I mean, I think there's more to be done, and she's not here, but we had somebody who approached our oral history table at a Milledgeville event and said, O'Connor loved the blues. My aunt was friends with her, whatever, mother, and all this stuff. And so we're documenting this stuff. You know, I think there's a lot of ways that people in the South experience race and racism differently than people in big cities in the North or California, where I'm from. All right. Do we have anyone else? This is such a good question. All right. Shall we? I appreciate you guys coming. Thank you so much, Evan. Admire your work so much. It's such a gift to us. Yeah, it's an archive. And please do go check it out. Go online, watch you can listen to the recordings of the Lomax recordings in the Milledgeville Penitentiary of the blues being sung. It's really, that's what I feel like, there's this haunting quality to all of this. All right. We'll see you at the book club Zoom event. a week from Thursday, or in Eatonton on the square at 2 p.m. And look for our newsletter. We'll capture your emails and put you on our newsletter. Thanks for coming. Appreciate y'all. Aw.